A busy city street. Phones recording. A police officer slams an older black woman onto the hood of her car, shouting that she's a thief. But what no one realizes is that this woman holds more power than the officer could ever imagine, because in seconds she will reveal her true identity and end his entire career. The late afternoon sun beat down on a bustling downtown street in Baltimore, turning the rows of brick buildings into glowing amber walls and throwing long shadows across the cracked pavement. Cars crawled through the narrow lanes, their horns blaring as impatient drivers tried to inch forward. Pedestrians spilled off the sidewalks, dodging bicycles and weaving through the traffic. It was the city's usual chaos, where everyone was always in a hurry, yet somehow always stuck. Among the endless noise, a sleek black Lexus sedan glided into view, its polished paint catching the light. Inside sat Judge Vanessa Cole, a woman of quiet elegance, her gray-streaked hair pulled neatly into a bun, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. At 61, she carried herself with the grace of someone who had spent decades commanding attention in the courtroom, her reputation built on razor-sharp intellect and unwavering integrity. To many, she was simply Your Honor. To those who knew her well, she was a symbol of resilience, a black woman who had climbed her way through law school in the 1980s, when women like her were barely tolerated, much less respected. Today, she had just left a legal symposium at Johns Hopkins University, where she'd been a keynote speaker. The talk, focused on judicial independence and accountability in policing, had drawn nods, applause, and a standing ovation from the law students who crowded the hall. Vanessa had spoken passionately, warning that power unchecked in law enforcement often bred corruption, discrimination, and abuse. Her words had landed heavy in the room, especially for the officers sitting in the back rows. As she guided her Lexus through the traffic, Vanessa felt the weight of the day lifting. She loosened her grip on the steering wheel, humming quietly to the jazz station on the radio. The car was her late husband's, a cherished piece of his memory that she kept meticulously clean. Every drive reminded her of him, of their road trips, of Sunday drives after church, of the life they'd built before cancer stole him away. She approached a red light and stopped, her eyes scanning the crosswalk where teenagers in school uniforms laughed and jostled one another. Just then, flashing red and blue lights lit up behind her, their reflection dancing across her rearview mirror. Vanessa frowned. She hadn't been speeding. She hadn't rolled through any lights. Her registration was up to date. Still, the sirens blared as the police cruiser angled aggressively behind her Lexus, trapping her between lanes. With a practiced calm, Vanessa pulled to the curb, rolling down her window slightly. She reached into her purse, pulling out her wallet with her license, registration, and insurance card neatly stacked. She taught her son years ago how to prepare himself during a traffic stop. No sudden movements, everything visible, polite words only. A cruel irony, she thought now, that she was living out the same drill she had once lectured to him. The cruiser door slammed open, and an officer stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, mid-30s, with a crew cut that made his square jaw look even sharper. His nameplate read Officer Daniel McCarthy. His stride was quick, heavy with authority, the kind that carried more intimidation than professionalism. He gripped his belt with one hand, the other resting dangerously close to his holster as he approached. Vanessa's instincts sharpened. She knew that posture, that air of presumption. She'd seen it in countless cases where officers overstepped, where arrogance and prejudice bled into supposed protocol. License and registration. McCarthy barked before he'd even reached her window. His voice carried enough force that heads on the sidewalk turned. "Of course, officer," Vanessa replied smoothly, passing him the documents through the gap in the glass. Her tone was respectful, steady. She had nothing to hide, nothing to fear, or so she thought. McCarthy glanced at the license, then back at the car, his eyes narrowing, his lips twisted into a smirk as if he'd just solved a puzzle. "This car's reported stolen," he said loudly, loud enough for passers-by to hear. Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," McCarthy snapped, his hand tightening on the papers. "Black Lexus, matching plates. Stolen earlier this week. Step out of the vehicle." "That's impossible," Vanessa said firmly, her voice still even but carrying a note of warning. "This is my car, registered to me. You have my paperwork in your hand." McCarthy leaned closer, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and acrid. "Don't play smart. I know stolen when I see it. Now step out before I pull you out." The crowd was forming now, commuters slowing to watch, some lifting their phones. A murmur rippled as people realized what they were witnessing. An older black woman being accused of car theft on a public street by a white officer who already looked convinced of her guilt. Vanessa's pulse quickened, but not with fear, with fury. She had spent her life fighting against this very assumption, this instinct that blackness equaled criminality. She wanted to shout her credentials, to remind him that she was Judge Vanessa Cole of the Baltimore City Circuit Court, that she had more authority in this city than he could dream of. But years on the bench had taught her restraint. Words were weapons, yes, but timing determined their power. "Officer McCarthy," she said evenly, "you are mistaken. This vehicle is legally mine. If you run the plates properly, you will see that." McCarthy's eyes glinted with the satisfaction of dominance. "Out. Now." When she didn't move quickly enough, his hand shot through the window, fumbling for the door handle. Vanessa gasped as he yanked the door open and barked, "Step out of the car." She rose slowly, her heels clicking on the pavement, her back straight, her head held high. Gasps echoed from the bystanders as McCarthy grabbed her arm roughly and spun her toward the hood of the Lexus. The sound of her body hitting the metal reverberated down the street. "Sir, that's an older woman," someone shouted from the sidewalk. "Leave her alone," another voice cried. Phones were raised higher now, recording every second. Vanessa's glasses fell to the ground, skittering beneath the car. She gritted her teeth as McCarthy pressed his forearm into her back, shoving her harder against the hood. "You're under arrest for possession of a stolen vehicle," he declared loudly, his voice carrying a performative edge meant for the crowd. Her mind raced. She could feel the humiliation searing into her skin, hotter than the metal beneath her. To these strangers, she was just another black suspect pinned by an officer who thought himself righteous. They didn't know her name. They didn't know her title. They didn't know she had sworn in mayors, presided over murder trials, and written legal opinions cited in law schools. All they saw was a spectacle. Vanessa inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Then, with deliberate precision, she spoke. "Officer McCarthy, remove your hands from me this instant. You have made a grave mistake." Her words drew murmurs. There was something in her tone, controlled, commanding, too polished for a supposed thief. But McCarthy only pressed harder, smirking for the cameras. "You don't give the orders here, lady. You're going downtown." Vanessa lifted her chin, the defiance blazing in her eyes. "Then I suppose it's time you learn exactly who you've put your hands on." The moment hung in the air, taut as a bowstring, as Judge Vanessa Cole's words rolled off her tongue. Her voice was not raised, yet it carried with a weight that silenced even some of the murmurs in the crowd. She was used to commanding courtrooms packed with lawyers, defendants, and press. Her tone alone had ended arguments mid-sentence. Now, pressed against the hood of her own car by a man too arrogant to see past his bias, she wielded it again, But Officer Daniel McCarthy didn't flinch. In fact, he scoffed. His eyes swept across the onlookers, who were still recording with their phones, eager for the next explosive moment. He thought he was in control of the story unfolding on that street. A police officer bravely apprehending a supposed car thief. He wanted the crowd to see his dominance, to see him as the authority figure restoring order. Yet, McCarthy sneered. "And who exactly are you, lady? Another scammer with a story." The insult hit Vanessa like a slap. She gritted her teeth, refusing to let his disrespect break her composure. "You are violating my rights," she said, her voice steady, deliberate. "And when this is over, officer, you will answer for it." The crowd erupted with louder murmurs, sensing something more was happening beneath the surface. People began calling out, "She's not lying, man. Let her talk. Check her ID again. She showed you her license." But McCarthy was locked into his performance. His grip tightened as he twisted her arms behind her back and reached for his handcuffs. The cold metal clicked against her wrist, the sound echoing in her mind like a gavel striking wood. "Stop resisting," McCarthy barked, though she hadn't moved at all. His words were for the recording phones, a script he knew too well. Vanessa closed her eyes for a moment, swallowing her rage. She had fought her entire life for dignity in a system stacked against her. From her first days as a young black attorney walking into courtrooms where white male colleagues sneered, to the years she spent proving herself twice over for half the recognition, to finally earning her appointment to the bench, she had endured every manner of condescension and disrespect. But this was different. This was public degradation, and the man wielding it had no idea whose career he had just shattered. With her hands cuffed, McCarthy shoved her upright, forcing her to face the crowd. He wanted to display his capture. "See this?" he called out, his chest puffed. "Stolen vehicle suspect, right here. Don't say we don't keep your streets safe." Boos erupted from the sidewalk. Someone shouted, "She's an older woman, man. That don't look right." Another yelled, "Run the damn plates before you ruin yourself." But McCarthy ignored them, hauling Vanessa toward his cruiser. Each step was a battle between her pride and the humiliation of being paraded like a criminal in front of strangers. Then, at the moment he reached for the rear door handle, Vanessa spoke again, louder this time, with the force of a gavel in a silent courtroom. "My name," she declared, "is Judge Vanessa Cole of the Baltimore City Circuit Court." The words sliced through the noise. The crowd gasped, voices rising in disbelief. Phones zoomed closer, capturing every second. McCarthy froze for a fraction of a second, but quickly masked it with a bark of laughter. "Judge, that's a good one," he said, smirking. "You think dropping a fake title's gonna save you? Not today." But Vanessa didn't back down. She raised her cuffed hand slightly, her posture regal even in chains. "You are assaulting a sitting judge of this city. I suggest you confirm my identity before this disgraceful charade costs you everything." The murmurs from the crowd swelled into a roar. Some people began shouting her name, recognizing it now. "Cole. She's real. That's Judge Cole. Yeah, she's on the news all the time. I seen her on TV after that big trial last year." Phones were now live streaming, sending the footage across social media in real time. McCarthy's smug grin faltered as snippets of recognition sparked in his mind. He had heard the name. Everyone in Baltimore's police force had. Judge Cole was notorious for her rulings against officers who abused their authority, for her fiery speeches about accountability, for her refusal to bow to political pressure. She was respected, admired, and, in certain police circles, despised. And now, here she was, in his custody, in handcuffs, with the entire street watching. McCarthy's pulse quickened. He could feel sweat gathering beneath his collar. Still, arrogance overrode caution. He wasn't about to let her outmaneuver him in public. "Lady, anybody can claim to be a judge," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Doesn't make it true. You're still going downtown until we sort this out." Vanessa's eyes blazed. "Officer McCarthy," she said, drawing out his name with chilling precision, "you are about to make the gravest mistake of your career. Remove these cuffs immediately, or you will regret this beyond imagination." Her warning wasn't shouted. It wasn't a plea. It was a verdict. The crowd went wild. Some cheered her courage. Others screamed at McCarthy to listen. A woman's voice rang out above the noise. "You're done, man. That's a judge. You're finished." McCarthy's jaw clenched. The situation was slipping from his control, and he knew it. His training screamed at him to de-escalate, but his pride and the eyes of the crowd pushed him further. He opened the cruiser door and tried to shove Vanessa inside, but she planted her feet, refusing to move. "I will not step into that car," she declared. "Not as a criminal. Not in chains. You want to make this mistake. Do it in full view of these cameras." The crowd roared louder. The spectacle had become a showdown. On one side, a uniformed officer clinging to authority. On the other, a handcuffed black judge, her dignity unbroken, her defiance electrifying the air. McCarthy's radio crackled suddenly, the voice of his sergeant breaking through. "Unit 34 report. We're getting multiple calls about your stop. What's your situation?" His hand flew to his shoulder mic. "Got a possible stolen vehicle suspect. Black female, late 60s, refusing to cooperate." Static, then silence. Then the sergeant's voice again, sharper this time. "What's the name on the license?" McCarthy glanced at the card in his pocket, hesitated, then muttered, "Vanessa Cole." The silence that followed was deafening. "Cole," the sergeant repeated, his tone shifting instantly. "Unit 34. Do you mean Judge Vanessa Cole?" The blood drained from McCarthy's face. The murmurs of the crowd seemed to grow louder, closer, as if pressing in. Confirming," he stammered, but the sergeant cut him off. "Release her. Now. That's an order. Do you understand me?" McCarthy's mouth went dry. He could feel every camera phone aimed at him, every eye watching for his next move. His pride screamed at him to push forward, but his gut twisted with fear. Vanessa turned her head just enough to look him squarely in the eye, her voice low but laced with steel. "I warned you, officer." The crowd erupted again, sensing the tide had turned. McCarthy fumbled with the keys, unlocking the cuffs with clumsy hands. The metal fell away from her wrists, clattering against the pavement like the shattering of his authority. The moment the cuffs came off, Vanessa straightened, adjusting her blazer with slow, deliberate grace. Though her wrists bore red marks, her posture radiated power. The crowd cheered, phones flashing like fireworks. McCarthy stood frozen, his face pale, sweat trickling down his temple. He wanted to disappear, to crawl back into his cruiser and drive away. But there was no undoing what he'd just done. Vanessa turned to the crowd, her voice rising above the noise. "You all saw what happened here today. Remember it. Share it. This is what unchecked power looks like." The cheers grew thunderous, drowning out McCarthy's shallow breathing. He was no longer the star of this spectacle. He was its villain, and the story had already escaped his control. As Vanessa retrieved her glasses from beneath the car and placed them back on her nose, she cast one final glance at McCarthy. It wasn't anger in her eyes anymore. It was something colder. A promise. "This," she said softly, so only he could hear, "is far from over." By the time Judge Vanessa Cole slid back into the driver's seat of her Lexus, the videos of her arrest were already circulating online. She could see it in the way bystanders were hunched over their phones, their eyes wide as they replayed the footage again and again. In the rearview mirror, she caught Officer McCarthy standing rigid beside his cruiser, his face ghostly pale. The crowd was dispersing now, but not before some shouted parting words that sliced at him like knives. "You're done, McCarthy. She's a judge, fool. Pack your bags." Vanessa adjusted her mirrors with cool, deliberate precision. Outwardly, she projected composure. Inside, a storm raged. The humiliation of being pinned to her own car, cuffed like a criminal, still burned in her chest. Her wrists ached. Her pride stung, but her resolve only sharpened. She had spent her life teaching others that justice was not optional, that accountability must be demanded. Tonight, she would demand it for herself. She turned the ignition, the smooth purr of the Lexus filling the tense silence. Without another glance at McCarthy, she eased away from the curb. The crowd parted for her as though she were royalty exiting a battlefield, their cheers trailing after her. As she drove through the city, her phone buzzed relentlessly in the passenger seat. Dozens of missed calls, texts, and email alerts flashed across the screen. Colleagues, journalists, even her clerk. Word was spreading faster than wildfire. One call in particular stood out. Her son, Marcus. She answered on first ring. "Mom." His voice was frantic, layered with both fear and fury. "I just saw the video. Are you okay? What the hell happened?" Vanessa exhaled slowly. "I'm fine, Marcus. Shaken, but fine." "Fine. That cop slammed you on the hood. In broad daylight. The whole city's watching it." "That's exactly what he didn't understand," Vanessa said quietly, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "The whole city is watching." Marcus, a civil rights attorney himself, knew that tone. It was the tone she used when she was already strategizing, when she was mentally drafting her arguments, before ever stepping into a courtroom. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice lower now. "What I've always done," she said. "Hold people accountable. But this time, Marcus, it won't be in my courtroom. It'll be everywhere." By nightfall, the footage had gone viral. Clips of Officer McCarthy pinning Judge Cole to the hood were plastered across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, each caption more damning than the last. "Baltimore cop arrests judge for stolen car. Ends up cuffing his own career." She told him who she was. He didn't listen. Watch his face drop. News outlets picked it up within hours. Local channels led with it on the evening broadcast, while national anchors teased the story with incredulous voices. Tonight, outrage in Baltimore. A veteran judge wrongfully accused and cuffed in public by one of the city's own officers. What does this mean for policing and racial profiling? The footage was dissected frame by frame. Analysts replayed the moment she declared her name. Commentators debated whether McCarthy's actions were incompetence, bias, or outright malice. Hashtags calling for his resignation trended across platforms. At home, Vanessa sat in her living room, the glow of the television flickering against her face. She sipped tea slowly, her wrist still sore, but her resolve unshaken. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had been disrespected, dehumanized, or dismissed by the very people sworn to protect them. Her phone rang again, this time with a number she knew well. Chief of Police Harold Sloan. "Judge Cole." His voice began cautiously. "I want to personally apologize for the actions of Officer McCarthy. It was a grave mistake." Vanessa let the silence hang, forcing him to feel its weight. "Chief Sloan," she replied finally, her tone cool and deliberate. "Your officer publicly humiliated a sitting judge in broad daylight, in front of dozens of witnesses and hundreds of cameras. This is not a mistake. It is a symptom of a disease in your department. Please understand, we're launching an internal review immediately. An internal review will not suffice. She cut in. Her words were as sharp as a verdict. This city watched your officer pin me to the hood of my car as though I were a common criminal. Do you understand the damage that does? To me, to this community, to the fragile trust you claim you're rebuilding. Sloan cleared his throat. I do. But I assure you, McCarthy will face discipline. Suspension at minimum. Vanessa's lips curved into a cold, humorless smile. Suspension? Chief, let me be clear. That man's career ended the moment he put his hands on me. What comes next is merely the paperwork. She ended the call without waiting for his response. Across town, Officer McCarthy sat alone in his dim apartment, the glow of his phone illuminating his panicked face. He scrolled through social media in disbelief, watching video after video of himself become internet infamy. His name was everywhere. Headlines screamed his disgrace. His inbox was flooded with messages, some from colleagues urging him to lay low, others from strangers, calling him every vile name under the sun. He hurled the phone onto the couch, pressing his palms into his eyes. How had this spiraled so quickly? He'd just been doing his job, he told himself, following a lead on a stolen car. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He hadn't checked the database properly. He hadn't verified the plates. He'd seen an older black woman in a nice car and jumped to the conclusion that she didn't belong. And now, the entire world knew it. A knock rattled his door. He hesitated, then opened it to find his union rep, Detective Paul Hanley, standing with a grim expression. Dan, we need to talk. Inside, Hanley didn't bother with pleasantries. He dropped a folder onto the table. They're throwing you to the wolves. Chief Sloan's already drafting statements. The mayor's office is livid. And Cole, she's not just any judge. She's respected, connected. You picked the worst possible person to mess with. McCarthy rubbed his temples. It was a mistake. I didn't know. Hanley cut him off. Doesn't matter. Public opinion's set. You're the face of everything they say is wrong with this department. They'll cut you loose to save themselves. McCarthy's stomach churned. So what do I do? Hanley gave him a long, hard look. Pray she shows mercy. But McCarthy had seen the fire in Vanessa Cole's eyes. He knew mercy wasn't coming. The following morning, Vanessa walked into her chambers with her head high. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, voices shouting questions. Judge Cole, do you plan to press charges? Do you think the officer should be fired? Is this about race or about respect for authority? Vanessa paused at the top of the steps, turning to face them. She wore a navy suit, her posture regal, her voice calm but commanding. This is about accountability, she declared. No one is above the law, not even those who enforce it. What happened yesterday was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a culture that too often treats suspicion as evidence and prejudice as instinct. I will not allow what happened to me to be brushed aside, not for myself, and not for the countless others who never had cameras to capture their humiliation. The crowd erupted with questions, but she simply turned and walked inside. The image of her standing at the courthouse steps, dignified, unbowed, determined, splashed across every front page by noon. And as Officer McCarthy sat glued to the television, watching her words echo through the city, he realized with dawning horror, she wasn't just coming for his job. She was coming for the entire system that had taught him he could act with impunity. And this time, she had the whole world on her side. The following week transformed Baltimore into a city on edge. Each morning's headlines carried Judge Vanessa Cole's name alongside images of Officer Daniel McCarthy. Frozen in the moment, he shoved her onto the hood of her car. The videos had not only gone viral, they had ignited a national conversation. Cable networks debated it endlessly. Editorial boards demanded reform. Protesters marched outside the Baltimore Police Department, chanting her name as if it were a rallying cry. Inside the courthouse, the air buzzed with tension. Judges, clerks, attorneys, everyone whispered about the incident in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward Vanessa as she strode through the halls. Some colleagues approached her with cautious sympathy. Others, particularly those with close ties to law enforcement, avoided her gaze. But Vanessa was unmoved. She walked tall, her step steady, her expression one of unshakable resolve. Behind closed doors, she convened with her closest allies, her son Marcus, her longtime clerk Denise, and 2 civil rights attorneys who had worked with her on past initiatives. They gathered around her office conference table, a pile of printed reports and legal briefs between them. Public outrage is still peaking, Marcus said, scrolling through his tablet. Hashtags are trending. People are demanding McCarthy's resignation, and not just locally. This thing's national now. Even the New York Times picked it up this morning. Denise nodded. The governor's office called. They want to know how far you plan to take this. Vanessa folded her hands calmly. As far as it needs to go. What happened to me was not personal. It was systemic. If an officer feels bold enough to manhandle a sitting judge on public street, imagine what he does to those without power, without a platform. One of the attorneys, Gloria Watkins, leaned forward. So what's the play, Judge? Lawsuit, civil rights claim, push for federal investigation. All of the above, Vanessa replied. Her eyes hardened. We're not just going to end one career. We're going to expose the culture that created him. Marcus smiled faintly. He'd seen this look in his mother's eyes before. The look she wore when she dismantled corrupt witnesses on the stand, when she authored blistering opinions that shook city politics. It was the look of a woman sharpening her blade. Meanwhile, Officer McCarthy's world was collapsing. He sat in the sterile lobby of Internal Affairs, his badge confiscated, his service weapon locked away. His phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, some offering sympathy, others warning him to lawyer up. His suspension was already public knowledge, splashed across the evening news. The police union had released a statement vowing to support him, but even he could read between the lines. They were hedging, distancing themselves, bracing for fallout. Inside the interrogation room, 2 IA investigators grilled him relentlessly. Why didn't you run the plates before escalating? Why did you cuff her before verifying her identity? Why did you continue after she identified herself as a judge? McCarthy stammered through half answers, claiming he acted in good faith, insisting he had mistaken urgency for aggression. But he knew it sounded hollow. He could see it in their skeptical expressions, in the way they scribbled notes without looking at him. When the session ended, he left the building through the back door to avoid reporters. Cameras still caught him, their shutters clicking like gunfire. Questions flew at him as he pushed past. Officer McCarthy, do you regret your actions? Are you going to resign? What do you say to Judge Cole's accusations of systemic bias? His jaw clenched as he climbed into his car. He wanted to scream that he wasn't a racist, that he hadn't meant for any of this to happen, that he was being crucified for one mistake. But deep down, the truth gnawed at him. It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. He had stopped plenty of drivers like her before, convinced by instinct alone that they didn't belong in the cars they drove. The only difference this time was the badge his victim carried. The hearings began 2 weeks later. Baltimore City Hall was packed wall to wall, the council chamber overflowing with reporters activists, and community leaders. Cameras lined the back, their red lights blinking steadily. The hearing wasn't technically about McCarthy. It was billed as a broader inquiry into policing practices and racial profiling, but everyone knew whose name hung in the air. Judge Vanessa Cole sat at the center of the room, poised behind the microphone. She wore a charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled into a tight bun, her presence commanding respect before she even spoke. When the council chair invited her to deliver her testimony, the room fell silent. 2 weeks ago, she began, her voice steady, I was driving home from a symposium where I had been invited to speak about the dangers of unchecked policing. Minutes later, I became the living example of my own warning. I was stopped without cause. I was accused without evidence. I was cuffed without dignity. And I was humiliated in front of the citizens I have sworn to serve. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The cameras zoomed closer, capturing the fire in her eyes. This is not about me, she continued. I carry a title and a platform that shield me. What happened to me cannot be buried, but countless others every day endure the same humiliation without cameras, without witnesses, without justice. This city's trust in its police force is not fragile because of one officer. It is fragile because too many officers have forgotten that their badge is a duty, not a weapon. The applause that followed was thunderous. Council members leaned forward, nodding gravely. The hearing stretched for hours, with witnesses recounting their own experiences of profiling, lawyers presenting data on racial disparities in traffic stops, and activists demanding reforms. But it was Vanessa's words that dominated the evening news, her testimony replayed on a loop. McCarthy, watching from his apartment, felt his stomach twist. She wasn't just winning public opinion. She was cementing it. Behind the scenes, Vanessa moved strategically. She filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice, triggering the possibility of a federal investigation. She met privately with the mayor, pushing for a civilian review board with real teeth. She gave interviews to national outlets, each one more damning to the culture of impunity within the police force. Her allies rallied. Civil rights groups pledged support. Law students volunteered to help her compile case histories. Even retired judges wrote op-eds praising her courage. She wasn't just fighting back. She was leading a movement. And McCarthy, his suspension turned into a recommendation for termination. His name became synonymous with disgrace, cited in think pieces as the cautionary tale of arrogance meeting accountability. Old complaints resurfaced. Citizens each stopped before, alleging similar behavior. The union could no longer shield him. He was summoned to a disciplinary hearing, the outcome all but certain. On the morning of the hearing, he caught his reflection in the mirror, the uniform pressed but hollow, the badge no longer shining with pride but tarnished by infamy. He thought of the moment on that street, the smugness in his voice, the crowd's jeers, the cold defiance in Vanessa Cole's eyes. He had believed he was in control. Now he understood she had been in control all along. And when he entered the hearing room, Judge Cole was there too, seated quietly in the gallery, her presence a silent reminder of the gavel that was about to fall. The trial that followed was one of the most publicized cases the state had ever seen. The courtroom overflowed daily with reporters, activists, and citizens who had once doubted Judge Matthews, but now rallied behind her. The irony was stark. A veteran black judge, once assaulted on the street and accused of theft, now presided in moral authority over the proceedings against the very system that sought to humiliate her. Though she could not be the presiding judge, her testimony and presence dominated every session. On the first day of testimony, the prosecution replayed the body cam footage for the jury. Gasps filled the room as the images showed Officer Bradley Williams shoving Judge Matthews against her own car hood, his hand pressing down while he shouted that she was a thief. The audio revealed her repeated identification as a judge, her calm attempts to show her badge, and his escalating aggression. Each pause, each shove, each insult landed with brutal clarity. The defense attempted to argue that Williams was simply following procedure, claiming the judge matched a vague description of a car thief reported earlier that day. But the evidence collapsed under scrutiny. Dispatch logs revealed there had been no such call in the area. Records showed Williams had a history of complaints, mostly from minority citizens, citing racial profiling and excessive force. Each fact stacked higher, like bricks building a wall of undeniable truth. When it came time for Judge Matthews to testify, the entire courtroom went silent. She walked to the stand with her robe folded neatly over her arm, a symbolic gesture, showing she was there not as an authority, but as a citizen demanding justice. Her voice, steady yet charged with emotion, filled the chamber. I have spent decades upholding the law. I have defended this system in the face of skeptics, telling them it could be just, it could be fair. That day, Officer Williams didn't just pin me against my car. He pinned every hope I had for fairness beneath his knee. He accused me of theft, not because of evidence, but because of the color of my skin. He looked at me, saw no badge, no robe, no history, only a target. That is not procedure. That is prejudice weaponized as power. Her words rippled through the room. Even some jurors dabbed their eyes, their notepads paused mid-scribble. The cross-examination was brutal, but Judge Matthews never faltered. When the defense attorney suggested that Williams couldn't have known who she was, she replied, "You don't need to know my name to know my dignity." He treated me as if I had none. That's the crime. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on charges of false arrest, assault, and civil rights violations. Williams's badge was stripped, and with it, his career. The sentence carried prison time, though reduced by plea negotiations. Still, his reputation was destroyed. The man who once strutted on city streets with unchecked power now faced the weight of accountability he had evaded for years. But the victory extended far beyond his conviction. The trial sparked sweeping reforms. The police department announced mandatory bias training, revised stop-and-search protocols, and the creation of a civilian oversight board. State legislators pushed through bills inspired by Judge Matthews's ordeal, mandating transparency and officer misconduct records. Her suffering had become the catalyst for long-needed change. Yet revenge, for Judge Matthews, was not simply about seeing Williams punished. It was about reclaiming control of the narrative. She had been humiliated in public, and so her response had to be equally public. The night of the verdict, she stood before a rally of hundreds gathered outside the courthouse. Flashing lights illuminated her figure as cameras broadcast her words live across the state. "I was accused of being a thief," she told the crowd, her voice resonant. "But what was truly stolen that day was my right to walk freely in my own city without fear. What was stolen was trust in a system that promised fairness. Today, that trust begins to be restored. Today, we showed that no one, not even those with badges, are above the law." The cheers were deafening. Protest signs waved in the air, many bearing her face with the words, "Dignity is not optional." Others read, "Justice for all, no exceptions." As weeks passed, Judge Matthews returned to the bench. The first day she walked back into her courtroom, the staff rose to their feet in quiet respect. Even opposing counsel, often wary of her sharp rulings, nodded in acknowledgement. She had not only survived, she had emerged stronger, her name forever tied to resilience and accountability. Still, in quieter moments, she reflected on the ordeal with a mixture of pride and sorrow. No victory in court could erase the humiliation she had endured on that hot afternoon, pressed against cold metal while strangers filmed. But perhaps that was the point. The memory lingered, raw and sharp, as a reminder of the work still ahead. She vowed to use it as fuel, ensuring her platform as a judge and as a survivor continued to spark reform. Months later, a journalist asked her if she considered what happened to personal revenge. She smiled, her eyes narrowing with thought. "Revenge," she said slowly, "is short-lived. What I wanted was consequence. Consequence is lasting. Consequence changes systems, not just people." Williams lost his badge, but more importantly, the city gained accountability. That's what justice looks like. The image of that day, the officer pressing her down, the crowd recording, remained iconic. It circulated online, on posters, in news segments. But with time, its meaning transformed. At first, it was a symbol of outrage. Later, it became a symbol of triumph. Where others saw a woman shamed, she saw a judge who refused to bow. For Officer Williams, his fall from grace was sharp and merciless. Friends distanced themselves, job offers evaporated, and the community he once patrolled turned its back on him. He applied for private security positions, but each time, his name dragged him down like an anchor. Meanwhile, Judge Matthews's influence only grew. Invitations poured in from law schools, from advocacy groups, from national conferences, seeking her voice on justice reform. In one speech at Harvard Law, she closed with a line that echoed the wisdom of her long career. "Power without accountability is tyranny, and prejudice with a badge is a loaded weapon. Both must be disarmed." The audience rose in thunderous applause. Years later, when younger attorneys and judges spoke of her case, they remembered not only the trial but the woman who turned humiliation into momentum. Her story was retold in classrooms, in training sessions, even in police academies as a cautionary tale. She had become more than a judge. She was a standard, a warning, and an inspiration. And so, the day that began with injustice ended in transformation. Judge Evelyn Matthews, once forced against her own car in handcuffs, stood taller than ever. She had not only ended the career of the officer who wronged her, she had reshaped the very system he thought he represented. Justice was served, not just for her, but for all who watched and believed change was impossible.